really been looking forward to this, and you can consider
And you're
yourself
live.
blessed because we're not going to be doing this anymore. Charles and I laugh when we recall my father's answer years ago. I asked him, "So what are you doing, Dad, since retired?" And he said, "Beats me, but it takes up the whole day." So we are going to officially, this is our goodbye tour.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, I'm glad I was able to get you.
Charles has so many areas of expertise that he would love to answer questions depending on the interest of the individuals in your audience. First of all, I do want to say that Emil Marzak is busy editing a second documentary. As you know, he did the first Walking with the Tall Whites, a very talented filmmaker from Stockholm, Sweden, who actually was the videographer for the Swedish Army in Afghanistan. And it was there that he heard about Charles and first contacted us. And he had sent me snippets of his work because he's done work for the UN, and he did a very nice video of a Auschwitz survivor. So I was very impressed with his work. We had turned down contracts from known Hollywood entities. We weren't interested in swimming in those shark-infested waters, but we decided to take a chance with Emil, and we've been very pleased with his work. You know, some of the silly cartoons of extraterrestrials that he put in the movie aside. We think he did a fantastic job, and we're looking forward to seeing the second movie ourselves. Now, Charles' Hall photon theory has been out since the 90s. And if you understand that there are more forces at work within the photons, then you'll start looking at things differently. In particular, the Webb telescope has recently generated some interesting photos that Charles thinks show that there are mirage galaxies. And he's actually done a video on Rumble that you can look up later. Just type in mirage galaxies, Charles Hall, and it should come up. The last book in the series, Norwegians with 24 Teeth, was one of the two books that we put out during COVID. And one of the reasons it took Charles so long to publish a book about beings that he actually was introduced to while he was still a teenager, before he ever went into the service, is because the girl that he went to high school with, etc., that he mentions but disguises her name in the book, you know, those people are still alive. And he just as he disguised names and places in his first 5 books, he was also you know, nervous about printing the Norwegians with 24 teeth. And I have to say that at your latitude, you probably have some Norwegians with 24 teeth in your population. When we Skyped Bergen, Norway a few years ago, the people in the audience were very familiar with that anomaly. As you may know, we are all genetically programmed to have 32 teeth, but the Norwegians with 24 teeth have 24 teeth. And it seems apparent that they have, in fact, intermarried. You know, they've been here for a long time. A lot of them maybe don't even know they came here from another planet. And so they, in Norway in particular, they have seen people with something between 24 and 32 teeth, like people with, say, 28 teeth. Anyway, one of the most interesting stories in his book, Norwegians with 24 Teeth, happened just a few years ago when Charles was still working. A gal that he had observed at meetings, you know, at a distance, because she didn't work right next to him, came up to him and she said she was being transferred back east, but she wanted to buy the complete set of hardcover books at the time, the ones that were out. He had only mentioned Norwegians with 24 Teeth briefly, just very briefly in the third book. What was that? Going Home. And now
The road home.
The Road Home. I'm drawing a blank here.
Yeah, no, they're
Anyway,
good,
she
so
said
go ahead.
that she grew up in a play group, and all of them were pretty upset because when they were 4 or 5 years old, their parents had found parents to adopt them. And the only thing they had told these families was they were going away, they weren't coming back, they wanted their children to have a good life, and please keep them together in a play group. And so these children were all people with 24 teeth, and they were pretty angry. They couldn't imagine a group of parents all going away and leaving them with families. And she said it wasn't until she read his books that she realized that was what she and her friends must be. And she said it was, of course, most interesting. She had a complete set of the books, but she had sent them back to her friends to read. And that's why she wanted another set. Anyway, I think it's possible that you might see these people within your own population in Minnesota, because Charles first ran into them in Wisconsin.
Yeah, after reading that book, I was kind of wondering that myself. How many people I may have run into, yeah.
The other topic that Charles is happy to talk about is, of course, the Greys. He had several, while he was with the Tall Whites for over 2 years, some of that time was spent a number of PBYs where the Greys are. It was the children of the Greys who had crashed at Roswell. So if you have questions about that, you might hit him with that. And of course, everybody knows about the Tall Whites, and he's still going to be happy to answer questions you have about them as well. So anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Charles now, and hope you have some interesting questions for him.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Marie.
Yes, you did a wonderful job. And you feel free to tell me at any time, because
No, I'm leaving the room.
you stay by, because I'm 2 hours of talking, you know, I sometimes need to get a drink of water and stuff.
Bring you some water.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for having
Hi,
me.
Charles.
Hi, thank you for having me. And it's probably, I have so many, you know, I could talk for 6 months or something, because, you know, I was out there for more than 2 years with the Tall Whites and in the Valley of the Greys. And then I, you know, have more experiences with the Norwegians with 24 teeth. Remember, 24 teeth are the baby teeth. And we humans have one set of 24 teeth and then one set of 32 teeth. The 32 teeth are the adult teeth. The Norwegians with 24 teeth do not have adult teeth. When they lose a baby tooth, another baby tooth comes in. When you look at the x-rays of a Norwegian with 24 teeth, and I have seen them in my dentist's office, as I describe in my book, it looks like, you know, you see it looks like the x-ray of a child, where, you know, you see the regular teeth that are baby teeth that are there, and the ones ready to come in. Well, it means that when they're adults, like 25, if you pull out one of their teeth, another one grows in, But then if you pull that one out, another one grows in, you know, that they just keep repeating baby teeth. And since they're the Norwegians with 24 teeth, since their natural life expectancy, they told me, was 141 years, they can keep getting new teeth all the way till nature calls and they die. So it's not unusual for them to get a new set of teeth when they're 70 years old. In Ireland, there's a holiday for the old Duchess, and you can look that up on the web. And she was famous for having a whole new set of teeth at the age of 70 years. Now, she wasn't a first generation, or she wasn't a new arrival. She was, you know, like her ancestors had come to Earth several generations before. So she thought, like all of them, you know, they had assimilated. She thought of herself as being human. And you can see that, you can read about that out on the web, and I mentioned her in my books. Ireland has a festival for it. But I think it's better, because I have so much material, if I let you guys ask the questions, and then I'll try to be brief with my answers. When I was young and healthy, I could talk for, you know, a few 100,000 hours without gasping for breath. Now I'm down to a mere 2 or 3 days, you know. But I'll let you guys ask the questions, and then I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Okay?
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us what, like when you first met the tall whites in at Nellis, well, at Indian Springs, which is now Creech Air Force Base, was your first interaction with the teacher's child? Is that how that worked?
No, actually, the very first interaction with the tall whites was that I didn't recognize them as being extraterrestrials. The first interaction was at Nellis, and it was the first week after, when I arrived at Nellis, I was, as I describe in my books, I was first assigned to work with another airman who was, he was an airman first, and he was close to being discharged. And we were supposed to work nights alone at the Nellis weather station, and just the two of us on weekend nights and stuff. And he had just come off from like a month's leave for medical reasons, because the tall whites would come into the Nellis weather station. At Nellis, the building there was one building. One end of it was the base operations building with nice new bathrooms. The other end was the Nellis weather station. And the tall whites would come in at night, typically on graveyard shift on Sunday morning, when they would be, you know, just touring themselves, the aircraft hangars and stuff, to take advantage of the clean bathrooms, because they're flesh and blood creatures like we are. And that building had the only publicly available clean bathrooms for at least a mile around. And of course, the weather observer working was the only person in the building at the other end. And he had come across them. And the first meeting he had, and of course, he was absolutely terrified, because, you know, he thought he was alone, and he thought they were demons or ghosts or whatever. And the Pentagon had wanted me to work with him. He was coming off doing his first night shift in like several months. He wanted me to work with him, because and then he would be discharged, receive an honorable discharge. And then I would be the one that worked alone in the webs, because of in the building alone at nights. And they thought that was the best way to get the ball rolling. And of course, when he only worked one night, and then he got his honorable discharge and went back to Long Beach, and I was left alone, working alone, even though I was brand new. And then they gave me a different OJD. He he was originally going to be my OJT instructor. Then they gave me the second OJT instructor, who explained to me the legend of Range 4 Harry up at Indian Springs. And after only a few nights of working, when I came out, when I came out from the I was working swing and graveyard alternating, and my OJT instructor was working both shifts the same. And when I came out from working swing shift, but my OJT instructor was still inside, they were waiting for me in the parking lot of the Nellis weather station behind the trash containers called the White Elephants. And there were five of them, at 3 adults and 4 adults and a teenager who liked dancing and stuff around me. It was a young lady. And as I was walking back to my barracks, she was following me, and they were all standing out intentionally where I could see them. And I thought I was sleepwalking. I thought that because I was very tired at the time, that it was just me sleepwalking. And I was thinking, well, so this is what it's like when you're sleepwalking. It seems like it's so real, you know? And that was actually the first time I saw them, but I couldn't believe they were real. But on the other hand, they were obviously real. So the first meeting was quite confusing, because, you know, I kept thinking it was me. So I pushed that out of my mind, because, you know, your mind has to make a decision to keep you alive, you know. If you're going to walk, then you got to walk in reality. And if you're going to dream, then you got to sit down and dream. And I didn't recognize them as being the tall whites from Indian Springs, or I just thought it was me daydreaming or sleepwalking. That went on for several times. Later, when I was sent up to Indian Springs to relieve a second guy, the duty range observer up there, he was the one that had gone AWOL, and the cooks covered for him. And he's the one I describe in book 1. And he was such a nice guy. And he was from Los Angeles as well, the Long Beach area. God, I wanted to be him. I mean, he was such, I mean, he had a nice car. He had a wonderful personality. I mean, he was just but he didn't know, but he'd been an orphan. His mother had died when he was young. And when he was out in the desert at Range 1, he described his experiences when he encountered the tall whites, and he was absolutely terrified, not just of the tall whites, but of every piece of ground you can see up at Indian Springs out on the ranges. And he had, after his first encounter, when the boy wearing his protective fingernails, metal fingernails, had cut him on the wrist accidentally, trying to get away from him. He was so terrified that when he went into base, he told the cooks he couldn't stay there, and he could never go out in the ranges again. So what he had done is he trained the cooks to cover for him, and they understood, and the range rats and so on, they understood, because they had seen them, the tall whites, out on the ranges, and they were afraid of them too. And the tall whites were equally afraid of the humans. And they understood. So for like several months, he was actually in Long Beach, and the Pentagon knew it, but they understood as well. Because I speak from direct experience, when you're 20 miles out in the desert and there's no other humans around, and you're told that you're out there alone, it's a summer night, and then you turn around, and right there within touching distance, where you could reach out your hand and touch one, there's the teacher standing there smiling. She's waiting her turn to look through your theodolite and see what you're looking at. And your mind just can't put 2 and 2 together and get 4 anymore. And, you know, you don't even know if you should be afraid, or if you've died, or, you know, I mean, the shock, there aren't words for it. And the other men who had that happen to them, would leave in terror and never, and I say never, come back. And the tall whites used to refer to me as the one who came back. You know, if I was afraid, they described me to the others as the one who just goes into the chow hall and has a nice meal and talks to all the guys and then comes back out again. And so I was the one who returned. And they didn't think of me as being particularly brave or even better able to handle a desert than the others. They just thought of me as the one who knew how to go in and eat, you know, have a nice meal, talk to the others, laugh it off, and come back out. And so my first experience at Indian Springs wasn't out on the ranges. It was in the barracks. I was bunking alone. Indian Springs had lots of barracks from World War II, but there were only a few airmen up there, you know, range maintenance men and stuff. There might not, one time it wouldn't be unusual for me to be alone on base on Sunday afternoon, or for there just to be me and a cook on base. And of course I had to take the morning run. So that meant that I bunked alone in my barracks, and I would get up at 3 a.m. and drive out into the desert alone. And of course, in the night, I had to get up and relieve myself in the restroom. But it was the double barracks that lay parallel to the tarmac at Indian Springs on the northwest side. And when you went out the front door of that barracks, you could just keep walking into the endless desert, out into the mountains and the areas, the back door to Area 51 and everything. And they would come in off the desert and play in the barracks at night, even though I was sleeping there. And it was the one of the first ones that I remember was I got up one night. It was like 1 a.m, and I had to relieve myself. So I woke up suddenly. I was bunking in the bunk on the end. And so I was young. I was 20 years old. And so I jumped out of bed. I woke up and jumped out of bed almost all in one swoop, and went walking down the center aisle to the middle of the barracks where the latrines were, and then it had another empty, and everything was empty except where I was. And as I was walking by, I could see what seemed to be some white patches on the left, and I could see what seemed to be a tall white young man with a fluorescent suit on. It was radioactive on the right, but I had to hit the men's room because it was urgent. And then when I got up to the last one on the left, there was one with a lady in there. And of course, this is a military base. There's, no women in the barracks. But I didn't have time to stop and worry. I had to hit the men's room, and so I made it to the urinal. And then when I finished, I didn't want to be rude, because it seemed like there were more people in the barracks than me. And so I, turned around to where the sinks were, and I didn't want to look in the mirror and stare at them, but I could have, because you could see in the mirror that she was there. So I washed my hands and everything. And then I wanted to be, I didn't want to be rude or, confrontational or anything. I wanted to look like I was cool, and, like this happens all the time to me. Because I didn't have the faintest idea of what was going on. I thought maybe I was still sleepwalking like I had been down at Nellis. And as I was walking by, I looked over pleasantly into that first thing, and the lady was standing there with a squarish weapon pointed right at me. And she wasn't more, if I'd reached out my hand, I could have just touched her, and she'd have fired on me. And she was terrified of me. And I was so shocked, I just kept walking. I couldn't think of anything else to do. I just kept thinking, just keep walking, just keep walking. I walked back, and then I could see the other guy who was Range 4 Harry on the left, and I just kept walking. I mean, I was beyond terror and beyond shock. I mean, I was kind of, and the only thing I could think of is just keep walking, because that's how your brain is when you get that way. And when I got back down to the far end on the eastern side, I just got into my bunk, and I said, well, I'm still alive. I climbed into my bunk and put my blanket over, assumed the fetal position, and put my head under the blankets and went to sleep, and said, if I'm awake in the morning, I'm probably just dreaming, and I probably just need to go to sleep and wake up again at 3. And when I woke up at 3 and the barracks were empty and the doors were open, because they'd left them open on the way out, I was saying prayers of thanks to God that I hadn't died while sleepwalking. And that was kind of like one of my very, very first. But then when I would go out in the desert and I would see those same people, your brain will do anything and I speak from direct experience, anything it has to keep you alive. And so my brain wouldn't let me connect the people I'd seen at Nellis, the people I'd seen in my barracks, and the people I was seeing out in the desert, down at range 1 and down at range 3 and down at range 4 and over at range 2. It seemed like those were all different people. Really, they were the same people. The teacher, range 4, Harry, her children, the children, she had one girl, and then the other two were her school children, and the guards, and tool bus driver or school bus driver, the mechanic, co-pilot, and so on. It wouldn't let me connect those because it would make it seem like they were all different people when you saw them in the distance. But I'll stop and wait for the next question from there.
No, if you want to keep going on that, feel free.
Well, when meeting the tall whites, when at first, one time, months later, when I was talking with a guy that introduced himself as the highest ranking psychiatrist in the Pentagon, I asked him some questions. I said, why did you choose me? Because it seemed to me like there were a large number of airmen, weather observers, who were simply better weather observers than me at reporting clouds, and who knew the desert better than me and knew how to repair their trucks better than I did. And it was a motor pool vehicle, but when you're out there alone, you got to be able to change a tire and stuff. I asked him, why did he choose me? And he said, because when he went to college, and he had like 9 PhDs in psychiatry, he said that he was taught that there were 105 or 102 psychological defenses, each one different, like whistling in the dark, that a human can use. But most humans don't use more than 2. And that one of the tasks that he and his 3 high-ranking associates, psychiatrists, were engaged in was trying to teach bird colonels and 1-star generals how to use more psychological defenses for their own good, so that Congress could promote them, because most of them were showing up with only 2, no more than 3 psychological defenses. And of course, if you're going to be a general and fight a nuclear war, you got to have lots of them. And he said that he said that when he told his associates that I had all 102, which they thought was impossible, he swore that in the first time he interviewed me, within 15 minutes I displayed 70 of them, and he was certain I could do the other 35. And by comparison, he said the generals that he had 2 generals that he was working on, and they had started out with 2 psychological defenses, and he had told his associates privately that his goal was to increase their number of psychological defenses to 7, and they said that was impossible, and he said no, he could do it. And the best he could do was to increase their psychological defenses that they would use to only 3. And so he said that if you're going out into the desert the way I had to, and he himself didn't know what was out there and wasn't allowed to go out there, but he said if you're going to send a man out to the desert, and you're going to send him 50 miles out there where not even human guards are allowed, and no other human is allowed, and that there's something unknown out there, the way they did to me repeatedly, and you expect him to come back alive, the first thing he's going to need is every psychological defense known to man, or else he's going to die out there. Okay, because once a man panics, and I speak from direct experience, if you're out in a rainstorm out in the desert or a hot summer day and you panic, then nothing good is going to happen. There's just before you ever discuss what the military would do, or what the extraterrestrials would do, or how many there are, just the desert itself. Out at range 4, we don't think of a dry lake bed as having quicksand along the southern side. I damn near died in it. We don't think of a dry lake bed as having sand so fine and so hot, thick that when it gets hot, like 140 degrees, it becomes another form of quicksand. We always think of quicksand as quicksand mixed with water, and the dry lake bed at Lake 4 had that. But if there's also just quicksand because the sand is so hot, I damn near died in that. And there's no warning when you step from where the sand will take your weight to where it won't. It's like standing on the ridge of and I speak from direct experience. It's like standing on the ridge of the Grand Canyon and taking one more step and falling 1,000 feet to the floor. And there were so many times that I almost died out there. And that was before you ever got to meeting the extraterrestrials. I remember walking around the corner of the Range 3 lounge one day, and the Range 4 Harry was standing there. What he was is guarding the trail that led to the northwest out to one of the playgrounds for the tall white children. And since he wasn't afraid of me, he'd come here when he was grown up here when he was a child. He'd been here for more than 200 years. He was armed to the teeth. He was just standing there smiling, protecting the trail. Now, if he hadn't been protecting the trail, I never would have seen him. He would have fallen back when he heard me coming. But because he was guarding the trail, what he didn't want was for me to go down the trail and surprise the teacher and the children while they were playing. Because even though they're smarter than we are, they're surprisingly easy to surprise if they're doing something. And so he just wanted to make sure that I stayed where I was and let them play. And as I started walking towards him, I couldn't believe he was real. I said, "You're real, aren't you?" And he said, "Don't come any closer." And I didn't know what the hell to do. Now my hallucination, I thought maybe I was hallucinating because it was 108 degrees in the shade. And now my hallucinations are talking back to me. And I said, "Are you real?" And he said, "I'm as real as you are." And I didn't know what to do. I started laughing to myself. Now my hallucinations are talking back to me. And your mind goes into denial, even though you can see him standing there in the sand and seeing that he's real. Well, that's when you need one of the first psychological defenses, the ability to look at harsh reality and deny that it's real and say you're just hallucinating. It's another version of whistling in the dark, because right then, if I had turned and panicked and ran back to my truck and floored it and went back into base to get back to safety, well, you can't drive a truck 50 miles an hour on a desert road that's just been bladed, or a gravel road, without having some kind of major accident. Your life is, you no matter what you do when you're out there, before you ever do that, you have to sit down, and I speak from direct experience, and say your prayers with God while you're still in the barracks sitting on your bunk and saying, "I'm Roman Catholic," and say your favorite prayers and saying, "Please be with me no matter what happens." And you have to be, even though it seems so easy to just drive your truck up there, you have to be ready to die and not run. And that takes you can't do that on day one. And there came a day that first I went through the denial, and then I came through the running phase. And then there came a day, on the last day of the running phase, I was out there at 3 a.m. and the tall whites were assuming the high-speed horse formation that I can describe later, and coming down the road from range 4. And they had done so on several nights before, three before. And I had followed the plan that if they came over the last rise and kept coming, that I would put my stuff down at my satellite stand and physically run to my truck, which I had parked over by the generator shack, and as fast as I could drive into town for my own safety. And I was driving into town on that road, and it came to the S turn, to an S curve. I'd gotten to the paved part, to go around the end of the Indian Springs runway, and the wind had blown in sand on that S curve. And I should have been doing like 15, 20, and I was doing like 45, 50, and it slid on me. And I went crossways on the road, and I just barely got it stopped before going into the ditch on the southeastern side. And I was sitting there shaking, holding onto the steering wheel, saying my prayers. And it felt to me like all the world, like my two guardian angels who love me and are with me. And I think all of us have two guardian angels who love each one of us, came and were with me in the truck. And one was saying, you know, you can't do the, if you keep doing this, you're going to die. You know, you're going to have to just stand there and trust us to save you. And so that night, I sat and I thought things through, and I said, they're right. I said my prayers, and I turned my truck around and went back out to face them alone. That night, they had already left. I could see them still going back up the road to Range 4. But the next night when they came, I was ready. The next night was the night when I didn't run. When I parked my truck on the side out in front of the range, not directly in front of the generator shack, but out to the west boundary, so that I could get into the, so that it was facing the graveled area. And then when they came down the road in the high-speed horse formation, I was at the theodolite stand. I said my prayers, and I just put my stuff down, and I didn't run. I just walked carefully, shaking all the time, over to the front of my truck, and stood with my back to the radiator so they couldn't get behind me, and just stood there and faced them. And I was determined that tonight I would learn, were they real, or even if it killed me. And I said my prayers. And that night, after they deboarded arranged their high-speed horse, the head guard, he had to have been 7.5 feet tall, armed to the teeth, wasn't the slightest bit afraid of me, could have turned me into ashes anytime he felt like it. And he just walked over towards me very arrogantly as I stood there with my back to the front of the truck. And the teacher and Pamela had gone over to my weather shack, and the teacher was showing Pamela my weather shack, while the children were playing, and the other guards stood back up, you know, like, if the one guard can't take me, the other one will. And I was almost too afraid I was shaking, almost too afraid to talk. And the guard came over until he was less than, 6 feet away from me. And in a very arrogant tone, he just said to me, "Tonight you don't run away, Airman Hall." And I was shaking, and I said, "No, tonight I don't run away. I only come out here because I'm ordered to, and I've decided to come out and perform my duties like a man, or die like one." And he said, "You know, we could have killed you the night before when you were hiding in your weather shack and we were outside, if we'd wanted to." And I thought I'd pushed him too far. I thought, oh my God, he's going to kill me. And so I was saying my prayers, and I said, and almost in desperation, I mean, I was like begging. I said, I know you can, but, and then almost in desperation, I used one of my psychological defenses. I said, "You haven't killed me yet, so I don't think you're going to." And I was shocked. He broke out laughing and laughing. He turned to the others and he said, "Hey, there's a smart one over here. He's got it figured out." And then he turned to me and he said, "You're quite right. We could have killed you anytime we wanted to." And then walked over laughing and saying, "He understands it. We can kill him whenever we want to." And then he went over to Pamela and said, "See, he knows we can kill him whenever we want to. Now go talk to him." And I didn't know what, I felt like I was coming out of the Passover. I mean, I was just standing there shaking. I didn't know, I was too, there was no point in me trying to get back into the truck and drive anywhere. I was shaking too much to drive. And then Pamela, the lady whom she was trying to pass her technology transfer test, and the one where she pretends to be my wife and the other guy pretends to be my husband, and they go into Lawrence Livermore. with the American generals in tow and the other ones disguised as humans, and have the Livermore scientists put on a presentation of what they're doing, thinking they're only talking to humans, which they did. And I was the test person for her to test on. Then she said she would, but she was still too afraid of me that night to do so. So laughing, they all took their good time walking around showing her everything. And then they got back on the high-speed horse and formed back into the high-speed horse and got and went back up the valley. And I must have stood there for 10, 15 minutes wondering, gee, what the hell do I do next, until I could get control of myself again. And so the early meetings, before I could handle it all, it took a while to handle it. Nobody just walks up to an extraterrestrial on day one and is at ease and at home with them. Nobody. No human that I ever knew. But okay, next question.
Wow, it's just amazing. So I've heard you talk about the teacher before. Who is Pamela?
The teacher was was very high ranking. And one of the things that the tall whites and the American generals, and they'd been here since the Ice Age, so they knew perfectly well I was the lowest of the low-ranking airman. One of the things the tall white general agreements they had was to do technology transfer, not dictated by the generals, but dictated by the tall whites. If there were projects like better radios that worked on the ground and also out in space, they could work together on that. To do that, the way they would do it is the tall whites would form up into pairs, men and women pairs, that would pretend to be married. And then surrounded by the American generals and surrounded by the tall white guards and surrounded by the human guards, then they would call up particular professors or research guys that, for example, at Lawrence Livermore would be one, Argonne National Labs another one, but whatever. And then the tall whites would dress up to look like humans, and then they would tell the schedule that the professors, let's say he was building a radio for say like an F-104 jet fighter. And of course it came in a box and it had several slots, and he was only going to put in two electronic cards in it, but there were 6 slots, and that was a spec. And so they would tell him to give a briefing to a 3-star general. And of course the room was a room inside a building with corridors all around it, no windows. And so you could have guards in the hallway and everything. And there wouldn't be any lights on. And the only lights that would be on would be 1 or 2 on the stage showing the guy on the stage, but not the people in the audience. So he would be expected to get up and give a briefing answer questions, and the people in the audience would write their questions on paper and hand it to the 3-star general, who would hand it to him. So he never got to actually see who was in the audience, okay? And then that would be done in 3 steps. The first step was where everybody was allowed, the unclassified people were allowed, and he would get up and give the unclassified briefing. And it would say nothing, it wouldn't say anything important. It would say, well, the radio is painted green, it comes in a box painted green. So if you see, and then after that, then they would have a 15-minute break. And then all the people with unclassified, all the people would leave, and only the people, and the next briefing would be a classified briefing. For example, it might be a first level confidential briefing, and then they would come in and the guy would give them another briefing and would say, and the green paint is made with, chromium oxide or something, and then they would go out. Then they would have another 15-minute break and the lights would be off, and then they would have the briefing for the 3-star general. And everybody else would go out of the room. The guy would get up on the stage, so he couldn't see who was in the audience or how many. Then they would open the door and bring in the tall whites team. The 3-star general would still be there. And the guy would still think he was talking to humans, you see? And then, if the tall whites had any questions, immediate questions, like if we gave, like you have the bus specs or the electronic bus specs, if we gave you 2 more cards, could you put them in that box, and what would it do? Or they might just hand him the questions written and say, please deliver the written answers by, classified email to the general, and then we'll get back to you. And so he wouldn't know that he was talking to the tall whites. Well, the tall whites, if they had questions, wouldn't ask him directly. They would hand him the question to the general, and the general would say, can you answer this now? And so that was how technology transfer was going on. So many of the American professors and high rank, the quality folk that knew how to build things, you see, would never know that they had actually been giving a briefing and talking with extraterrestrials, because of the generals were in between. Well, the tall whites themselves, when they first come here, are terrified of humans, and they come armed to the teeth. And so before the tall whites are willing, like the 2 tall whites that would head up like Pamela and her other person pretending to be her husband, her personal guard, before they would be willing to come in and do that, everybody's generals, ours and theirs, they all agreed there had to be a test human who understood how the tall whites reacted, and they had to come and practice and they had to come and practice on him. His name was Charlie Hall, otherwise known out on the ranges as Teacher's Pet, okay? He's the one that can go anywhere he wants, anytime he wants, day or night, above ground, down below ground. He's got the back door open to Area 51. The Area 51 is just the welcome area where ordinary airplanes are tested. The areas go up to 60. He can do that anytime he wants. But he has to always be alone. And if he ever gets in trouble, he alone, with God's help, must bring himself back to the safe area at Indian Springs. I mean, physically across the line, or die trying. No one will ever come looking for him. And there were 7 men before me, that no one ever came looking for except me, okay? And no trace was ever found. And there were 41 men before me that came back. Some came back burned. They all came back terrified. And I came back laughing, at least at the end. And when you go and see, and what that allowed me to do, was alone to drive up to the base on the mountains at the north end of the Indian Springs Valley. And everybody knew me. So then the human guards that were holding the outer perimeter on that base would just, the gate would be open. You just drive in. The tall whites, if they felt like showing themselves, would come out and talk. If they didn't, they wouldn't. But the point was that the Pamela, but before the Pamela and her husband or any of the others would be trusted to go into Lawrence Livermore, remember, they're going in armed. If they panic, they can kill some of the quality folk and call it self-defense, and the American generals won't blink an eye, okay? Won't blink an eye. They can do anything they want. The only thing is, but if they panic, they can kill anybody in their way for freedom. So before they go in, they first have to prove to our generals and their generals that they have to turn off all their equipment, come out to range 3 or range 4 or wherever I am alone, and walk up to me on my terms and turn their back to me and dance around me so that they're back to back. And if I feel like reaching out and touching them, which I never did, then they won't do anything. They have to prove to me that they're so used to being around humans that they can do that while the others watch. And that's what and the twins, that's what the twins had to do. And that's what Pamela had to do. And she did. But along the way, we have book 3 where she first try, she panicked and I damn near got killed. Okay. And I damn near died out there in book 3.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. Can you expand a little bit on that? What happened?
Yeah, they where she was going to fire on me using the sodium weapon, which makes it feel like you've touched 100,000 volts AC. And she had it set wrong. She had it set for the iodine weapon, which always kills without pain, without very much pain at least. And because she was panicking and set her weapon wrong. And she had to keep at that. And if I had said after that accident, that's it, I'm going home, nobody would have questioned me. But after I'd shook it off, I said, well, now she knows what the weapon should be set back. And as requested, went back out Monday morning. Okay. And so we got to be quite good friends. Okay. And she was pretending to be like, she was pretending to be my wife, you see, and then her guard was pretending to be her husband, because that would just, that way it was, human men would naturally stand back from her. But see, every one of them, the twins had to, and Ehrlichman and John and Ehrlichman and that other guy, the only guy that was Secretary of State once when he was young and once when he was old. When he was young, oh, I'll think of his name. They were out there as part of the humans that would be the test judges for the humans. Ehrlichman and that other guy, whose name I'll think of for a minute. And when she came out and danced around me. She was very happy, the lady of the twins. The guy of the twins, he was willing to do it, but he trusted me, but he was always kind of jittery, you know. And although he was armed and could have killed me anytime he felt like it. and see,
Like
that's
walking up to a gorilla, right?
yeah, you know, don't worry, the girl's tame, you know. Try to get Charlie to do that without first loading the elephant rifle, 100 mega, you know, and it's pointed, you know. Yeah. And that's what and that's what I was. I was the cultural welcome wagon version of the welcome wagon lady, but I was also the only human. See, and that's why they never told me anything. See, because that would ruin the test. See, whatever the test was, if I was out there walking and then they were going to stand up from the sagebrush and walk over and, you know, just see what I was doing, it had to be spontaneous for it to be a valid test. Because when you went into places like Lawrence Livermore or whatever, you know, the quality folk, the guys that are building weapons at work, there's no requirement that a guy with a Ph.D. that knows how to build a weapon that works have a personality of any interest, you know. He can be as rude as, you know, as rude, as awful as, you know, if you ask him a question, he can say, what kind of stupid question is that? I thought I explained it. You know, he can be, you know, as obnoxious as he feels like, you know, because he's the only one that knows how to build the big bomb that goes bang or something, you know. And see, that's why they first had to test on me. They had to have a person to test on and get used to just being around a human. And of course, I wasn't that way at all. I was just myself, you know. How does God want me to teach the people around me? The answer is the way I want the people around me to teach me, you know, to react to me. And so, and then the first arrangement I made with the tall whites was they would always speak human when they were around me, because I only speak human, and speak English, and that I would never pursue, that neither one of us would ever pursue. They're electronics. They're not they don't have telepathy. They have electronics that can put their thoughts in my mind or their images in my mind and mine in theirs. Their electronics, I'm certain, works on me at least at 1.25 miles. but it must be able to read my mind at 3.5 miles. And so on the other hand, we humans are used to talking in shorter distances, like 5, 6 feet or so, when you're out in the boonies. And so when they would come in, see, the first question you had to negotiate was, how close does that mean? Does that mean they're going to stand out there at 1/4 mile, the way that one older lady did, and just talk to me using her electronics? And she's asking, can her children come and play and watch my balloons? And I'm saying yes. Do I have to get used to communicating like that? And the answer is yes. If that's as close as she wants to come, then that's how it's going to be. But on the other hand, when she gets braver, if she wants to walk right up and stand across from me on the other side of my theodolite, do I have do I panic, or do I wuss out? Do I say, gee, that's a little closer than I'm used to being? Because she's willing to walk right up and touch me if she wants to, because she's armed to the teeth. And so the rule was that whenever I saw them, I wouldn't scare them from behind. I wouldn't come up from behind them. I would just stop where I was and sing one of my Sunshine Desert songs, like Ricky Nelson. It's up to you, 'cause I've done everything I can. So let them know I'm here. And then they would approach as close as they wanted and stop. If that was closer than I wanted, I would back away. And if they saw me backing away, they would stop where they were, and I would stop where I was, until we were at a distance where we both felt comfortable. And then we could communicate, you see. On the other hand, if they wanted to leave at any time, even if I was talking, they could just leave, and I would never pursue. I would just stand there and let them leave. They could go away, but the reverse was true. If I was not quite able to face them, and I just kept backing away, they would stop. They wouldn't pursue. They would just stand and let me walk away. And it would frequently come to that. Like, they had a tall white general who, I guess, liked me, but you'd never know it. He would have made my drill sergeant, and she would put my drill sergeant to shame, because when he said stop there, I mean, we're talking about a pencil thin line. Stop right there. God, I'm still afraid of that sucker. When he said, the only law that he lived by was whatever he felt like enforcing at the time. And on the other hand, the teacher outranked him. Lucky me. And I could say, I'm teacher's pet, so if you kill me, the teacher will ask questions, Pardon me while I shake here out of fear. And
Hey,
on the-
Larry, this is Larry Napper. I'm sorry I came in a little bit late. Could you tell me how you first ran into these tall whites? Did they come down in a spaceship or what? I'm sorry.
the tall whites, like the grays, are more protective of their spaceships than they are of their own body. It is easier to walk out in the desert and see the tall white extraterrestrials themselves than it is to see the safe haven they used to arrive from. In Indian Springs Valley, up at the amphitheater section, just before the Range 4 area, there was a series of satellite hills. During the Ice Age, when the valley was full of water, the waves would reflect against the amphitheater wall and dig out a hole, and they loved to park their spaceship down in there, and where they could protect it. Before they're willing to even show you their spaceship, they have to trust you. Before that, the thing that I found shocking was the easiest thing to see was their children, because the parents would stand back with arms drawn, fully armed, and send the children in to see if you were safe to be around.
Well, they were brave, huh?
If you made the slightest move towards their children, they'd cut you down like a dog. They could do that from a mile ahead. Okay.
So what did they have for weapons?
Yeah. So when you say, well, what was the first thing you would look for if you were going out in the desert to meet the tall whites, or the grays? is you'd go out with balloons and a picnic basket and some music and make it fun for the children, because that's what they're gonna send in first. And then what you're gonna do is monitor your watch, because it's to see if you have missing time. Because when their children come in, if the children are having fun, because you're playing cards and they want, or I'm painting a fence and they want to come help me, then the parents might electronically hypnotize you till they learn to trust, till the children are learn to be safe around you and break it to you gently. You know,
So did you see their spaceship then?
yeah, I've been on them. They would have taken me places.
Give me a little description of it, please.
There's the deep space, there's spaceships, the deep spacecraft and the scoutcraft are all capable of exceeding the speed of light many times over. However, the deep spaceship are built much better than the scoutcraft. Range 4 Harry himself was insistent that no one would take the scoutcraft could exceed the speed of light, but no one in their right mind would take it there, because it wasn't, he wanted to, before he took a ship that fast, he wanted it built better. You know? And the Greys were the same way. Their deep spacecraft could exceed the speed of
What did it
light.
look like? What did it look like?
The best technology was the Tall Whites. Their spacecraft they looked like if they were powered down and you were looking out in the desert, the front end looked sort of like a passenger train engine, sort of like that, but without a light on the front, because their technology was better than that. But they looked like an egg, okay? The deep spacecraft were large, and they were oblate spheroids, and they were squarish oblates all rounded, and they were black titanium. Excuse me. They were black titanium, and they looked like an egg. And like that one that I saw, that I helped in through the snowstorm that were down at Range 1, which was coming in with, I believe, meteor damage, where the meteor had blasted through the outer wall and made a mess of things.
Oh,
They're built like an egg with a double hull, and then they have kind of a shell-like structure. The inside of the living quarters and all those things are the inner part. So they're surrounded by storage rooms where food and gear and all that stuff surround them, so that if they take damage, the meteor had to come in through the outer double hull, then through the outer layer of storage rooms, and it missed the inner part where the humans, where the Tall Whites themselves were living, and it blasted out through the bottom.
did
And
they ever give you any idea of how this thing goes faster than light? Was it warping space-time, or didn't they
it's
say?
very simple. If you look at my Hall photon theory, there's more force fields than Einstein knew about. He should have, but he didn't.
Yeah.
When Einstein said E equals mc squared, okay, I'm not arguing with that.
Sure.
The question is, how does mass convert to energy? You got to have you got to have one or more force fields that are doing that compression. Einstein didn't have any force fields to do that compression. His formula was right, E equals mc squared, but when you say, so how does that actually occur? How do I take energy and compress it? I got to have a force field that is, grabbing onto the parts and making it stiffer, see? He didn't have any of those. So what he was doing was saying, oh, that's magic. He was filling in all the gaps with magical reasoning.
Yeah, it was pretty easy to make energy from mass, just split atoms, etc. But how do you do it the other way, right?
When Einstein said that the dimensions in this direction of motion get smaller, but I don't have any way to make the dimensions in the direction of motion get larger when I
Yeah.
slow down, okay? You have to say, so what force fields, and there may that one or more force fields, are keeping track of the inventory? I mean, if I'm in a spaceship and I'm going, if I'm in a spaceship and I'm getting smaller in the direction of motion, I'm getting close to the speed of light. How does the spaceship know that? Okay. You know,
Yeah.
a force field. He didn't have any. One time, the biggest shock I ever had when talking with the Tolhoites was the realization that Einstein some things like equals MC squared were right, but he was totally wrong on relativity because he was missing all the force fields that
Oh,
they used to define when building their spacecraft. And of course, that means there's more sets of quarks. There's, because you have to have quarks for all those force fields and so on. More sets of particles, you have to have more of those. One time in 1966, after I'd gotten over my fear and I was used to being around the tall whites, and I'd gone down to the Nellis library, and I was expecting them to be coming up on the next full moon for a new group of new arrivals to arrive. And I checked out like three books on Einstein. I had two of them out at the range, and I had them in my weather shack. I had them open to the page on Einstein, where Einstein was talking about relativity and his formulas. Now you couldn't go travel fast in the speed of light. And the teacher and Ranchport Harry and the tour guide didn't come on that one. That was school bus driver and the mechanic. When they brought in a set of new arrivals, and the new arrivals were in, and what I would do is I had the books open, and I also had my catalogs open to children's clothing and women's clothing, and see which ones found which tall whites found the different books interesting, because they were so heavy. The tall whites who are weak aren't very strong. Couldn't
oh,
turn
okay.
the pages. I was watching to see who found the book on Einstein interesting. None of them paid attention.
None of them, huh?
And the teacher was standing there. She was looking at the stars. It was a beautiful, clear night, and they can't see the stars in their home planet. They love to
No.
walk around Indian Springs Valley and just look at the stars, because that was something they couldn't do anywhere else anywhere else on their home planet. And I said to her, I was standing just a few feet away from her, and I said to her, I said, it's nice to see you back, teacher. I understand wherever you went. I see you were away for a couple of months, and I suppose that your spacecraft must be able to travel several times faster than the speed of light, because you must have gone there and gotten back in 2 months, and the closest star is 5 3/4 light years. Or Bernard star, the closest star of any interest. Alpha Centauri is almost 4. And I thought Einstein proved that it's not possible to travel faster than the speed of light. And she started laughing until she had to fall down the ground and laugh. And with her communications, she had communicated that to all the other tall whites, the guards down on the range, the tall white guards down to the Range Street Gate and up the valley, and they were all literally laying on the ground laughing and laughing and laughing. And
Good joke, huh?
after about 10 minutes or so, she got up and she was wiping the tears of laughter from her eyes. And she turned at me and smiled and said, "Well, as you can see, we're here now." And that was that's what they thought of relativity. Well, as you can see, we're here now.
Yeah.
And see, all that stuff in relativity, what Einstein is missing is that what he should have said in 1902, before they even knew the structure of the atom. He should have said, well, the mathematics gets pretty tricky if you go close to the speed of light, because you get zeros, you have missing terms in your equations, you get zeros everywhere. So you think there's ridiculous things like black holes and so on. And so what he should have said is, I have developed a kind of mathematics we'll call relativity. And what it does is it automatically prevents you from doing computations that exceed the speed of light, because I don't know what happens there. So what I've done is I've arranged it so that whenever it gets too fast, like close to the speed of light, zeros start showing up in places where there should be more force fields. But those aren't real. In reality, there aren't zeros there. What there are is more force fields taking over and guiding what happens. very same thing happens for supersonic airplanes. If you take the formulas for the flow of air for the right flyer, and you say, what happens if Orville and Wilbur tried taking their 1903 Wright Flyer up to 670 miles an hour, what happens? You get a lot of zeros in your mathematics, because what actually happens is the wings blow off because you're not streamlined.
Yeah, that's for
It's
sure.
meant to go to lift off 5 miles an hour and be happy at 70, you know? And
And say, can I ask you a question about,
when you say they flew the X-15 to 70 miles, achieved level flight at 70 miles, what did they measure? And you say the missing factor from the Orville Wright equation. You could express the equations of flight for airplanes exactly like relativity, except using the speed of sound instead of the speed of light. So you would have another term. You would have the design factor times 1 divided by 1 over the square root of 1 over the velocity of the velocity of the air over the wing divided by the speed of sound squared. And it would look the same way. And then what you would be measuring is the design factor. And what that does is it means that when you approach the speed of sound, if you have when you have, I'm sorry, it's the design factor times the velocity. Well, it's been a while since I checked the book, so don't quote me. But what you were measuring for the X-15 was the design factor for supersonic flow, because you wanted the X-15 to go across the supersonic plateau into the hypersonic plateau.
yeah,
So you wanted to know what that design factor was very carefully to make it across the transonic, the zone of natural instability, to make it into hypersonic flow.
yeah, it seems like they must be
Mhm.
warping space-time, because otherwise they get sonic booms and all that stuff, which they supposedly don't get. Say, could you talk to, I wonder, have you ever talked to the AARO office?
I'm sorry, I was coughing. Say again.
All nominee resolution office, is that what they call that thing? AARO, have you talked to them?
Grapple? Oh, those guys? No, I never. I know more about what was going on than they did, so there was no reason for me to do so. I was just happy.
They're asking for
Morning, sir.
ex-military people to talk to them, so maybe you should talk to them.
Many mornings I got up glad I was still alive, okay? More times than I care to remember, I could have died out there. Well, see, with the,
Hey, Charles,
yeah, well,
we got a couple other questions here. One of them is, what was their purpose for being there? Were they actually working with the U.S. military in reference to the tall whites?
The tall whites came to this earth, I estimate, during the middle of the last ice age. The grays came here first. I estimate they came here before the last ice age. The Norwegians with 24 teeth, I estimate, first came here about 10,000, 11,000 BC during the end, while the last ice age was still going. And when you say, what were they doing here? They're here for their own purposes. And they were willing to work. The tall whites were willing to work with the American generals, because traveling in space, you always need spare parts, fuel, refuel, food, and so on. And so that if they could buy stuff, they had to live by the very same laws we do, including the laws of economics. If you could buy food here, it was cheaper than bringing it across space. If you could buy, like the deep space craft that suffered meteor damage, if you could buy some of the replacement parts here, and you could buy the fiber optics and the titanium things from the Americans, which they did, that was a hell of a lot simpler than going back 105 light years away and getting the spare parts and bringing them over. A lot quicker. And I remember when they were shaking after the repairs 6 months later, when they were shaking down the deep spacecraft, they brought it out from the hangar with just 2 men on the crew, and it was still shaking a lot. Then they took it back in and fiddled, and then they brought it out with a fuller crew. And then I remember their first test flight where they took it out around the moon and brought it back in the daytime to see if they had finally gotten everything connected. And that's why there was a deep spacecraft and a scoutcraft, is because you put a lot more energy and money into the deep spacecraft than you had to in the scoutcraft, because the scoutcraft wasn't going to leave the solar system. And the Greys were the same way. They had new Gray deep spacecraft, which only adults would drive. They had the smaller ones for the children. So like Roswell was three children, groups of children going out to play. And nobody points out, every time they do, if you read my book on Roswell and the Valley of the Grays, on the 4th of July, 1947, the Roswell Army Air Base was planning a huge fireworks display that the children loved. Well, the children, their scoutcraft with the hands of a skilled teenager at the helm, had no problem whatever going to 70,000 feet or to the moon and back if it wanted to, and viewing the planned fireworks. And they're really beautiful. I've seen them from the air. They didn't care anything about the 509 to the nuclear weapons or anything like that. And of course the children's scoutcraft are always going to go out in groups of 3, because if one suffers a coil meltdown overheating, it'll want the other 2 to come alongside to stabilize it. See, and that's a group of 3. And the Project Mogul balloons, the scoutcraft they were supposed to achieve level flight at 70 miles. So that's a gray alien child's playground for for a couple of teenagers to take out 3 of their younger playmates and to go play with among the Project Mogul balloons at 70,000 feet and push them around with the force fields that are around when they power up. When you're around an alien spacecraft, there's force fields there. They're slightly radioactive, but the radioactivity is beta particles and positrons, which doesn't last very long, like a couple hours, and it's not very bad. It's really weak. And they're going to go up and play with the Project Mogul balloons at 70,000 feet and then stay and watch the fireworks. That was their plan. That would have worked, except that one of the gray alien children's ships suffered a coil meltdown. And that's when everything went to hell in a handbasket. And as you can see in my book. Well, the reason the humans didn't care if the gray aliens' children moved the balloons around is because they were trying to. The reason the humans were releasing the balloons was hoping they would float into the radioactive dust clouds that would come over from Soviet open air testing in Soviet Central Asia, and hoping that the currents would pull them in. And so if the children understood that if they were moving the balloons into the air currents, that they were helping. And so they were still having fun playing. So you see, and that's all missed by all these guys that think you don't know anything unless you're but a Magic 12 document. Magic 12 never knew what the hell was going on, so who cares what they wrote in their documents, right? And instead of what that was, and of course, one of the gray alien, a young lady about the equivalent age of 11, she was taken captive. And the gray aliens don't have gray skin; they look like they're Mongols. And of course, they knew English. Well, they grew up here, and so when the other 2 scoutcraft were on the search and rescue mission for the one that was down, the P-80 fighter that fell in behind him was the only fighter that was the first fighter that had ever gone to the Roswell Army Training Airfield with live ammunition. Because and of course, I've seen the tower transcripts. Until he transmitted the tower, they had powered down the outer coils, thinking the fighter behind them was like all the others, carrying only gun sight cameras and helping them with the search. And until he radioed the tower, when the acting base commander got there and asked for permission to make the live firing pass on the two saucers, they thought he'd come to help them. That's when panic struck and and everything went to hell in the handbasket. Another thing that all those UFO hunters miss is that molten fiber optics looks like molten rocks. Fiber optics is 49%, 0.6% aluminum and 50.2% silicon dioxide. That's rocks. When you melt, and it melts at somewhere between 1800 and 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. When you have a meltdown, as you had at Roswell, then you're going to get drips of molten fiber optics, and they're going to fall down, and when they cool, they're going to look like molten rocks. That was reported at one of the debris sites at Roswell as proof that it was aliens, because there's no other way to melt rocks out in the desert than something like that. And when you have these other guys going out, UFO hunters and stuff, looking at debris fields or crash sites or UFO incidents or whatever, one of the things they never look for is molten rocks, which would be the molten fiber optics. The most common accident for a deep space craft or for a scout craft to have is for a coil meltdown. Okay, that's what happened on the plains of St. Augustine, a coil meltdown. And when you go out there, what you see are molten rocks. Yeah. Oh well, you have
Interesting. Hey, we had another question come in here. Did they ever say where they were from?
Only the Norwegians with 24 teeth told me where they were from. The Greys and the Tall Whites never said where they were from. But when you look at their technology, the deep spacecraft could handle 105 light years. And I estimated it came from a southern star, because when they took off on the night of the new moon, they would go pop straight up above the atmosphere. Then they would stop in space and head for their next assignment. Lots of times that would be the stars, their next scheduled stop. Lots of times that would be the star Arcturus. But it wasn't unusual once in a while for it to be a star in the southern hemisphere that I estimated to be about 105 light years away. I estimated it to be directly over the latitude of Brisbane. The Greys, I estimated they came from a star much closer, not further than 11 light years. Okay. The Tall Whites, I'm quite certain they had a 20-year travel time. I'm sorry, the Norwegians with 24 teeth had a travel time of 20 years to get from their home planet here. And they said that their craft wouldn't have to exceed the speed of light to do that. It could just accelerate at 1G for 10 years and then turn around in space and fly with the engines forward and do 10G to come in and settle down. And that would get them as far out as and their craft might have been able to stand a travel time of 35 years, and that would put them out 11 light years. And so the Norwegians 2014 had to have come from somewhere within there. I'm certain that the Greys came here, were here during the Ice Age. One night I was out in one of the valleys of the Greys, and it was a beautiful place for an agricultural station in the Ice Age. There was a dry lake bed that had water in it. It was L-shaped. There was two sloping entrances, and there was rocks all around it, so it had a natural fence. And then on the one side, there was a wall that came square down to the sand. And when you looked up there, they had cut 13 tunnels into that side of that rock, and there were water lines in that rock left over from the Ice Age. And above the tunnels were above the highest water line, like another 20 or 30 feet up there. And when you went in there, the one on the right was the biggest. It could take a deep spacecraft. The other 12 were smaller, the scout craft, and in the back were grain storage jobbies. And then what they could do during the Ice Age, when there was water in the lake that had a natural overflow, is on the sloping sides they could grow, and they're plant eaters. they could grow anything they wanted, like wheat or whatever. And the 13th one had a stair cut in stone down to, that post a guard, and it could, and the guard with weapons could keep Ice Age animals from coming in either one of those entrances. So they had a natural grain field of several thousand acres where you could grow anything you wanted. When you looked at the dirt in that slanted area wasn't desert gravel. That had been plowed and full and farmed for a great many years. And that was in the valleys, of the Grays. And then when you went out further on the up and out in the valley a couple miles away, there was a transmittal station, like a telephone pole with that hum that was obviously able to transmit, to their main base on the moon. And so what they were doing is coming here to the Earth and growing their food and getting their water and maintaining the moon base. And that could all be maintained by older children and teenagers. That didn't require all adults to maintain it. Older children and teenagers, great children, can breathe our air. And so that's where many of them grew up. And when in their childhood playing out here in the sunshine, because they live by the same biology we do. You're healthier if you're playing in the sunshine in the summertime.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Jared, it's Charles
Yes.
over here. Yeah, we have a question here. If that,
Yep.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Charles, you mentioned the high-speed horse formation earlier on. Could you expand on that?
You see, say again, I didn't quite, there was some garbling, I didn't quite catch it.
At the beginning of your talk here, you mentioned that the tall whites had something called a high-speed horse formation.
That's another, that's a great question. See, the extra force, the way you build a craft that exceeds the speed of light is you have a double hull. And in between those two hulls, there's like 1,000 miles of fiber optics, and it's wound in horsetails and all other columns in different ways. And the propulsion system is gonna run subatomic particles through those force fields. I'm not sure which ones. One of them is going to defeat gravity, but there's 9 of them, and 5 are always used when they're building a craft. 2 are used for weapons, and only 2 are used for military. And that's how so you surround that with a bubble of that force fields, and those force fields on a scoutcraft will, when powered up, they're adjustable to any strength. Might extend as far out as 3.5 miles. So if you're driving your truck, I speak from direct experience, and you're getting within 3.5 miles of one of those scoutcraft, if it's totally powered up, your engine will start malfunctioning because the force field is interfering with the electronics in your truck, and you'll just have to stop and wait till it goes away. And that interacts with light. And when you see them powered up sitting out in the desert, they'll fuzz over because it's interacting with light, those force fields. Now, the deep spacecraft, those force fields may go out as much as 45 or 50 miles when they're totally powered up out in deep space. And those force fields, you see on that Navy photo, the TikTok photo, they say, look at the TikTok. What you're looking at isn't the shell of the craft. What you're looking at are the force fields around the craft. And when you say, oh, they're shapeshifters, the shapeshifters, those force fields can take on all sorts of shapes, depending on which ones you're using. Well, the same technology, the tall whites use in their protective suits. The Greys do as well, but it's less common to see the Greys wearing protective suits for various technical reasons. The tall whites, when they show up like if you just go out, like let's say you're 40 miles north of Indian Springs and you're out in the valleys, and one of them steps out from behind the sagebrush. He's wearing he's wearing his protective suit, and it puts out a zone of fluorescence with fluorescent particles coming out of it, radioactive around it, and that looks fluorescent. And if you have 2 adult men with their suits, and 2 adult women with their suits, and 3 children with their suits. The suits allow them to levitate, but they have to balance themselves. If the 2 women stand in front and pretend to be the head of the horse, the 2 men stand behind, bent over, pretending to be the last part of the horse, and the 3 children raise up to be the middle of the horse. And I speak from direct observation, and you see them out on the runway at Indian Springs on a nice summer night. You have a unit, those fields merge together. They're not like electric fields that repel each other, or they merge together. And you have a unit that looks for all the world like a high-speed horse. The women in the front will bend over, and they're going to steer it by which way they turn, you see. And then adjusting the force fields pushes them that way. And the men will push it forward in that direction. And they can go forward, backwards, up, down, anything. I watched them just for fun pretend to be airplanes taking off in the high-speed horse formation on Sunday night. And they would reach speeds, as a weatherman, you're always measuring things. They reached speeds of almost 100 miles an hour on the runway, and then they would lift up and go over and pretend they were a plane taking off. And then they would come around again and slow down. And then when they finally got, but when they got in close to me, see those force fields on the suits didn't this on the scoutcraft would last like 3.5 miles. On the suits, it wouldn't get that close. But if you were to get up close to them and touch it, that's what the guy before me did. And the pictures showed that from his shoulder down to his elbow, it had cooked the flesh totally off his bone. The doctor said it looked like radiation burns from Hiroshima. And he got because he'd just gotten into those force fields. So when you and when you stood at them, if they powered up enough, when you saw them a little ways away coming down the road from range 4, they might be traveling 100 miles an hour above, because they're floating above the gravel. But they might be coming down the road at 100 miles an hour. But what you saw looked exactly like a large white radioactive horse with long hair coming towards you. Like a large Trojan horse is typically depicted. And of course, when they got close to me, they would typically stop at the ridge at 1/4 mile so that I wouldn't get burned like the guy before me. And then then they would power down the fields, see, and they would all power down the fields, and then there'd just be 5 people standing there. I remember that if they just all stood together, it wouldn't look like a horse. It would just look like a column of light or a column of rain in the moonlight. And I remember the night that one of the first nights I saw him, recognized him as being up close, I thought it was raining out of a clear blue sky. And it was like, we're talking 4 a.m. in the morning on a clear blue sky, because there was 5 of them. And they were over beyond the range boards and the control tower. And I thought sure as hell it was raining over there, because that's how the sparkling from the subatomic particles look. You could see all 3. You could see an alpha particle now and then. You could see the beta particle now and then. And you could see the gamma rays now and then. As I would go over there, it'd fall back before me because I didn't want to turn down the field. And then when I remember calling in the weather report, I remember the forecaster who was there, and I said it's raining. I turned in the thing, it's clear blue, it's like 60 degrees. And then I said for comments, it's raining out of a clear blue sky over north of the control tower. And anyone else would have laughed at me, but he was so serious. He didn't know what was out there. Nobody knew what was out there but me. And he said, well, I've never seen it rain out of a clear blue sky. Would you go over there and get a better look? And so I went over there, and for a half hour, I tried to get a better look. The best I ever got was up close enough to see that it was 5 people. But the light that you would see coming out of there, photons of light I'm going to say this, must have a higher energy level than just Planck's constant times the frequency, because that light hurt my eyes, but it wasn't bright enough to turn a shadow. One night it was a Saturday night, or it was a Friday night, And there was at the Indian Springs, at the Indian Springs Airmen's Club, the 5 secretaries, lady secretaries came down our age from Camp Mercury. And they put on for a dance. And of course, there was only 13 of us guys on base. And of course, the girls were too smart to dance with me. They wanted somebody, who had a little money in a car and so on. And so I wasn't drinking. I only had a soda pop. And I'm not against alcohol, but normally I just have fun drinking soda pop. And when I went out of the Airmen's Club and I was walking downhill towards my bunk, the one with the double bunk, up the valley, 18 miles away, I could see a ring of 5 lights. And I knew that was the tall whites. And each ring of light was they were wearing their protective suit. And they weren't in the high-speed horse formation. They were just in a linear formation. And they'd be floating just above the sagebrush, maybe 9 inches or so. And they were forming a line, and they were coming down. They were heading, the line they formed was heading straight towards my barracks, which was because they were coming down to see me, and I'm coming down to play in my barracks. And they knew I was looking at them from 18.5 miles. And as soon as I came out, they altered their course so that they could go where the barracks and stuff would hide their approach. And at 18.5 miles, when I looked at them with my bare eyes, that hurt my eyes. The light coming off those 5 suits hurt my eyes as though you're out trying to look at the sun. Now, there weren't enough photons of light to cast a shadow at 10 feet coming off there wasn't enough photons of light to cast a shadow if I'd been 20 feet from them or whatever. But at 19 feet, but at 18 miles, for that to cause pain in my eyes means that each photon of light must have been carrying something like 10,000 times the energy of an ordinary ray of light from sunlight. Like Planck's constant times the frequency times 10,000 per photon. And so that means that now, in order for a photon to carry an elevated amount of light, but not change the frequency, means there's got to be more force fields in the photon and more ways to store energy in the photon. Because if you had taken that photon and said, what is the energy times, E equals mc squared, it would have still worked. But it would have still, there have to be more little, places, force fields and energy fields and stuff like that inside the photon for a place to store that much energy. Otherwise, the frequency of the light would change. If you were trying to get a photon that energetic, and if Einstein, if there was only one kind of photon, all you'd be looking at is gamma rays, which you'd never see with your naked eye. I guess I'm ready for the next question.
We got another question here. Yep.
Well, not so much a question, but clarify something. You said that a 70-year-old Irish woman got a full set of teeth,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. I think she said the
What you said.
Duchess of
Wouldn't
Decatur. She's called.
Wouldn't it be more correct to say a 70-year-old woman from Ireland got
Yeah,
a full set of teeth? And the reason why I say that is because I did a DNA test in January, and I'm Norwegian from the west coast of Scotland.
yeah. As you see in my book on the Norwegians with 24 teeth, because their technology is not as good as the whites or the grays, when the Norwegians, typically their fleet of ships also comes as a group of 3, and they come in pairs, and it may be 3 pairs or maybe 1 pair, because they must come straight in. See, the tall whites and the grays, their technology allows them to come and go into low Earth orbit or play games with the moon and land when they're good and ready. And so, unless they're damaged, that's why the one that I landed in the snowstorm was forced to land in the snowstorm because he was coming in damaged. But if he wasn't damaged, he would have just orbited for a couple of days. but the Norwegians with 24 teeth, when they're coming in, they have one shot, live or die on one shot. And they're coming in from the northern hemisphere. They're coming one shot to land. And Bernard Star is a northern hemisphere star. It's like up, and so they're coming in from the northern hemisphere and they're looking for the ocean. Normally, they'd be looking for the ocean west of Norway. And during the Ice Age, that was up until 6,600 BC, that was bare land. The ocean was called Doggerland. And even though it was 20 feet below sea level, it was protected by a seawall. That didn't flood till 6,600 or so BC. And they come in looking for the ocean west of Norway. And that pilot has typically never been here before. So he can easily confuse the west coast of Norway with the Shetland Islands, with the west coast of Scotland, with the west coast of Ireland. Or if he's coming in late, he can wave off. And because he's coming in engine first, all he can do is slow down. He can slow down and let the Earth turn under him and aim for the west coast of Lake Superior, for Duluth Superior, or for the west, or he can and mistake that, or Green Bay, Wisconsin, the west coast of Michigan, and land in directly in Minnesota or Wisconsin, or even in North Dakota. He can lay anywhere in there coming in late. And so you can find the Norwegians with 24 teeth anywhere from southern Canada to the west coast of to central Siberia. The only place they can't land is in the deep ocean. Okay, and see because they have only one shot, they'd rather crash land on the Earth than miss the Earth, and they have no go-around capability. They don't have the ability to slow down and turn around and come back and catch the Earth. And the Earth and Moon are really two planets bouncing each other around as they travel. So when they're coming in, see the two solstices and the two equinoxes, those are very important times for their navigation when they're navigating. So they're going to want to come in like a few days after the equinox or a few days after the solstice. Well, when they do that, it's because when they're far out in space, they have to make the last correction when they're far out in space, like beyond the orbit of Jupiter. And when you look at the Earth, the equinox, the Earth is perfectly lit up halfway, and the solstice is clearly at it. You can tell when it was at its maximum and that's at its minimum. So those are the 4 points you can. When you look at the Earth, you can tell exactly where the Earth is in its orbit, and that helps them greatly with their navigational computations as to how fast to come in on. Well, when you excuse me. Well, when you get only one shot and you're coming from the northern hemisphere, unlike the whites and the grays who want to land on the sundown side of the Earth, you want to land on the front of the Earth. Now at dawn, the Earth is traveling, you're on the front of the Earth. So you're going to want to come and land between, you're going to want to land in the front of the Earth, so that the Earth is coming this way, and the Earth runs into you. If you don't land successfully, the Earth hits you, and you're presumably apart with land on it, and you crash land. And so a lot of their landings are a significant number of their landings are crash landings. Like the first Norwegian with 24 teeth guy that I was talking to, hell of a nice guy. His pilot when he came in, wasn't aware that he was going to be coming in aiming at the Dogger Banks, which were high tide in water. So he took command of he didn't want to come in there. So he headed, in the words of the guy, he instead travel south, as he was coming in, aimed for a place further south that would have had to have been Scotland or Ireland. Now, at the time, I thought he was heading for New York City because we're here in America, and he was landing in Florida, but he would have landed in Scotland, Western Scotland or Western Ireland as well. And of course, the reason they want a beach It's because the beach is sandy, and wet. So if you come in, you're gonna hit wet sand, so no fires are gonna burn for long. And it's gonna be an open place where you can land without rocks. Yeah. Okay. Next question? Yeah.
Jared, we have another question here in Fargo, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Hall, thank you first of all for, with the presentation, appreciate it. So when you did speak with the tall whites in there, how did they move? Are they able to, I mean, I guess, how do they move around?
Well, they're humanoid, just like we are, and if they dress up like humans, you wouldn't know you were talking to 'em. Like the teacher liked to dress up like a nurse. Now, and you wouldn't know were talking to one, but I mean, Las Vegas, Nevada at midnight, nobody looks truly human. No, they don't, as I say, they don't age the way humans do. When they're about 40, they start growing again, and eventually, when they get really old, like 600 years, they're like 8.5 or 10 feet tall, and they die of old age because their organs don't support their body. But if you're talking to an ordinary adult, they're the same height I am, 5.5 or 6 feet tall, and they walk. They walk. They have to learn to get used to our gravity because they come from a bigger planet than we do, and and you can communicate with them in 3 different ways. If they've learned English, and usually, many of them that you would meet would, you could just talk to them in English, and their vocal cords are so flexible they can make any sound you want because their hearing range is as good as that of a dog, and they can make any sound even a dog. They can go and just talk to dogs using those high sounds up to 40,000, 45,000 cycles. On the other hand, if they don't feel like speaking English, or if they don't speak English, they have their electronics, and if it's adjusted properly, I said if, they can place their thoughts or images in your mind, and they can tell what you're thinking. Now, that's only if you're sitting relaxed and healthy. If you're walking around, the psychomotors for your legs make so much electronic noise they can't tell what you're thinking. Or if you're sick or angry, but if you're just sitting quietly with, not moving around reading a book on the history of the West, I speak from direct experience. The teacher can come up and put directly in your mind, like you're looking at the way you would call it up in your memory, the site of the Bennett family and the Lost 49ers camped in Indian Springs Valley the night before they camp at Indian Springs itself, arguing over what they're going to do when they get down to Indian Springs. Like you're there, the same way you would, if you had been there and then you said the next day, I'm going to remember that, they can make it look just like that. If you had a decent enough piece of electronics, you could capture that electronic transmission and put it on a television set, a 3D TV, which I know which I've seen, and recreate the whole damn thing. Now, if they don't have their equipment adjusted right, or you're not, well, then you're down to hand signals. So there was the night, and the hand signals can be kind of humorous. But there was the afternoon which I described in my books when it was 12:30 in the afternoon, and it was a hot day in the summer of '65, and I had just finished I was phoning in the noon balloon report to Nellis, and there seemed like a lot of static on the line. And my friend who was on the other end, Dwight, whom I called Dwight in the book, not his real name, noted that. And so, well, it seemed like somebody was listening in. So I bid him goodbye and we hung up. And then I was standing in front of my desk in my weather shed. And when I looked out the window of the door, I saw the teacher standing there, just right next to, just on the northeast side of my theodolite, and she'd been listening in, and she was bent over listening attentively. I hadn't been saying anything important, the winds were just out of the southwest at 5, but she was just very interested in listening in the conversation. And I was looking at her, and the sunlight was so bright, it was a clear day, that when the sunlight hit her white protective suit, the light, as it hit my eyes, caused my eyes to hurt. You know how if you go from a dark area out into the sunlight on a sunny day, sometimes your eyes hurt if the sunlight is bright enough and you're out in the desert, it caused my light to hurt. And this caused me some problem because I previously thought that she was a hallucination that I, just carried around in my mind. And it meant that if my eyes hurt, that pain was real. That meant the light was real. That meant that she was real. And so I was standing there looking at her for a couple of seconds, and she suddenly realized that I was standing looking back at her, and she smiled and stood up and took off running for the northeast corner of the Range 3 lounge. And when she got close, she put both feet together and jumped behind the lounge the way in baseball, the way a runner might jump on trying to steal second base, might run and steal second base. And she was having a great time. And I had to see that she was, I had to know if she was real, because I was certain now that I was now certain that I was looking at a real lady, that the lady I'd been looking at was real. And so I put on my canteen belts, and I had my 2 canteens, and I took my clipboard and I walked out there, and as I was just getting to my theodolite, Range 4 Harry, the lounge was off to the northwest, off to my left. He stood up in the desert about 1,000 feet out. He stood up on the sagebrush on the Bunker Road, and just stood there with his arms crossed, looking at me, intending for me to see him. And what he wanted me to know was that she wasn't alone. And he understood me. He understood that I wasn't going to continue past the theodolite stand, that I wasn't going to go and look around the corner of the Range 3 lounge the way I'd intended, because that would mean I would have to stand with my back to him and he could come up behind me. And I wasn't going to do that. And because that would allow him a clean shot of for electronic hypnosis at my temple. And so I just stood there for a while waiting to see what was going to happen next. I put my arms on my theodolite. I was wearing my long sleeve fatigues. On the sand, on the thing that held my theodolite, it was aluminum, cast aluminum. And waiting to see what happened. It made like I was just cleaning it, and he knew what I was doing, and he found it very amusing. And then after a little while, 10, 15 minutes or so, I could see the teacher on her knees. They were circling to the north from, albeit they'd gone over the quarter mile up, and they were circling over there. And they were having the time of their life, just laughing and playing in the sunshine, heading back towards where the trail led back up the valley to the base, and their scout craft was probably parked out there just over that hill. And as they were doing that, I started communicating with Range 4 Harry using body language, and if I had been using words, I would have said, I don't know what the lady wants. And he was responding, and he responded. If he had been using words, he would have said, neither do I. He got me out here following her around, and I don't know what the hell's going on, but we were like brothers. So right then you could communicate using body language. There was another night when the teacher and Range 4 Harry and tour guide and the crowd was off on a vacation / business trip, and I was certain they weren't anywhere in the solar system. And the new guard brought a group of 10 new arrivals down, and they were all as nervous as any, they were like bringing down like 10 nervous chickens who had never seen a human before. And, like they were going into a gorilla cage. And so as I was taking the Range 3, taking the morning reading at my theodolite stand, the 9 of them, remember I said he brought 10, came out from behind the Range 3 lounge, and eventually started with their back to the wall, started walking down the Range 3, down the Range 3 lounge. And the 10th one had gone around the other way, and he'd gone between the gap to the janitor's shack, and he was out in back where the tree was, where the trees were, the pine trees were. And the guard didn't know where it was, because their communication equipment is strictly line of sight. Well, when I didn't want to finish my run. I didn't want to go back to my weather shack, which was right back there. because if I surprised him, I knew he was well armed, he might fire on me. I wanted the guard to go get him. And so I waited and waited, and the guard didn't figure out where he was. And so I figured I better help the guard out. And the guard wasn't using, he just didn't have his equipment adjusted properly for me. And so I tried speaking to him in English, and he didn't, no response. And I tried thinking thoughts and no response. So I stepped forward to his side of the theater, and I stepped a couple, and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking all around in animated fashion, looking for his missing, for the other guy that he was missing. And so I took a couple of steps forward until I was just partway there, and then I stopped and waited for him to, to get his attention. And the guy next to him started shaking his arm and saying, no, look, there's the gorilla. And so then the guy, he was scared shitless of me. The guard took like a couple steps forward, like he was approaching the gorilla, and he was just shaking in terror. And so using my hands, I went like this. I showed him I didn't have any weapons. And then I said, like that to get his attention, say, the guard's over there, and showed with my hands where the guard was. And it suddenly occurred to him that I understood his problem. And you can't imagine how quickly he shifted from being the most afraid guard you've ever seen, to being just brave as hell. When he suddenly realized that I understood him and the problems he was having, and I was trying to help him, he became so brave, and he turned to the others like he was just, the Lone Ranger taking charge of the West, and put them all in line. And then he said, you stand there, then walked over there and got the other guy. And then the new guy was afraid to cross the boundary because he was afraid I'd see him. So he stood there like the crossing guard, just brave as hell, while the other guy ran across. It was the most comical thing you'd ever seen. And the next night, the guard showed up with his equipment working. But so there were
Hi,
lots of,
Charles. I have a question.
yeah,
Can you hear me?
yes,
I have
can.
a question for you.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you know anything about the genetics or any health conditions from being here on Earth with the tall whites or the Norwegians.
With the Norwegians, I do. With the tall whites, were very proud of being tall and white and had no interest in marrying a human. And their genetics were quite different, the same as with the grays. So you'd never have a human gray hybrid or a human tall white hybrid. However, the Norwegians with 24 teeth are so much alike us that they can intermarry. And I normally never comment on other people's stories, but there used to be a lady, Cynthia Crawford, who claimed to be an alien to human hybrid. She said her father, who worked at Camp Mercury, had engaged with the government in an experiment with an extraterrestrial, had told her that with an extraterrestrial, and that her mother was an extraterrestrial. Of course, when people hear that, they always think in terms of the grays or the whites or some weird extraterrestrial. It never occurs to them to think in terms of the Norwegians with 24 teeth, in which case her mother must surely have been a Norwegian with 24 teeth, and she must surely have been telling the truth. Now, she's dead now, and I always felt that I always felt kind of sorry that nobody believed her, or I believed her. I mean, I feel looking at her, you could tell she was, there was a resemblance. The Norwegians with 12, the only difference between the Norwegians with 24 teeth and humans that I was ever able to see was the women, the Norwegian women, both the women and the men, but especially the women, could sit still without fidgeting. Now, I used to, when I worked next to one for 6 months, we used to go to, so I didn't work right with her, but in the same group, and she was another group. When you go to a staff meeting, you'd have to get there early, and you'd sit there and have tea, coffee, and donuts and stuff. She could sit in a corner without moving for, one time I saw her do it for almost a half hour. All the other secretaries couldn't do it for 2 minutes. And I used to, and So the only way I ever found of picking them out from a crowd was if you saw a lady that could just sit without fidgeting for like 10 minutes, with just naturally, with a pleasant smile and stuff, because it was something that a human couldn't do. They're also said to have slightly webbed feet, but humans are said to have slightly webbed feet as well. Some humans are. And so, you know, I'm not sure if that's because of intermarriage or that's just a possible genetic defect.
Were you aware of any health effects that they faced being here on Earth rather than their home planet?
Say again. There was a lot of garbling. What's your question again? There was too much garbling. I didn't understand. What was your?
Were you aware of any health effects that they faced being here on Earth rather than their home planet?
For the grazers, a very big one. Their home planet is bigger than the Earth and has a higher oxygen content. The adults who grow up there are used to that oxygen level. When they come to the Earth, they cannot breathe our air without a health device, like a like a thing that looks like a big nose, or a breathing apparatus. The children, however, are able to breathe our air without a health device, without a breathing device, but can't go back to the home planet if they grow up here by that technique. And so that's why many people mistakenly think there's two kinds of grays. They think there's the adult grays and the tall grays and the short grays. Really, there's only one kind of gray. But the tall grays can't breathe our air without a breathing device, and the short grays can, but can't go home again without wearing a reverse breathing device. So that was the only health.
How about the Norwegians?
The Norwegians, their planet was exactly the same size ours is, and they didn't have any particular health effects changing planets. The grays, the tall whites and the grays both have to learn to walk in our gravity field because it's less than the gravity fields of their home planets. Okay. But I know that there are diseases that we can both get because
And were you aware of like any,
I know there's diseases that both humans and tall whites get.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Because many diseases infect only tissue types, not organ types. And I know that I know the tour guide and I got the same disease. In him, it almost killed him and took him like a month to get, or better, to get over. And I was credited with saving his life. But I got it over in just a day or so. But now your question?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the different genetics? I'm not sure what you're aware of as far as their genetics, specifically genetics that are vastly different than ours.
Yeah, the grays. The gray organ structure is vastly different than humans. They don't have a separate lung and heart. They have like an organ that, what would our lungs look like if the heart was a set of organs that pumped our lungs directly? The grays organs are much different. The tall whites, however, have organs that are surprisingly similar to ours, but I still don't think they can intermarry. The Norwegians with 24 teeth, the genetics between them and humans is in virtually, if your genetic study is not good enough to study the teeth, then you can't tell the difference genetically between the Norwegians with 24 teeth and the humans with 24 teeth. Okay. It'll look like they just came from a different part of the earth, like Norway.
Thank you, Charles. We're having some connectivity issues here, so I apologize for that.
Mhm.
Let me hit some of the questions that have come up through chat. It says, Dory asks, how many years did you interact with the tall whites and the grays?
More than 2 years, 2.5 years. Yeah.
Okay. And then another one here is, does Charles know if any of these races still live in the desert and where?
They came here during the Ice Age. You play hell getting the Greys to move out of the valleys. They kicked out in the Ice Age out in Nevada and California and other places. You play hell, they're still there. And the Grey generals are very arrogant, you know. I mean, when they give you an order, they mean it. So they don't idly move. The Tall Whites got you in the middle of the last Ice Age. And they're perfectly happy with where they are in Nevada, over at French Peak and Indian Springs Peak and over in there. And I'm certain they're still there. But you can see them even in southern New Mexico or in Australia. Remember the craft that the Greys and the Whites have, their scout craft, can physically cross from here to the moon in low gear at the hands of an ordinary teenager in less than a half hour, maybe only 15 minutes. So when you say, where could you run into them? You know, you could run into them anywhere they felt like being, because no matter where they are, they could be anywhere else on the earth in 15 minutes or 20 minutes.
Now, in one of your books, you had talked about a story of, I believe the teacher had told you it happened maybe 100+ years ago. They're out there and some settlers were driving through or something.
The 49ers, yeah. If you look in the web on the Lost 49ers from 1849, they were the ones that were camped at that place in Indian Springs Valley.
Interesting. Okay.
That's what the teacher was able to place in my mind was her complete memory of having watched them eat supper at that campsite. Old man Bennett was very embarrassed because they were having such trouble, and they'd been following his instructions and they were lost and didn't know where they were going. Yeah, his wife, he wasn't going to eat the meal. It was so sparse.
Okay.
And his wife, after the others that ate, who loved him dearly, came to him with a meal and said, "We depend on you, you have to eat." And it was a very touching moment for, you know, husband and wife.
Nice. Another real quick question here is, who relieved you of duty or took your post at Indian Springs when you left?
The last, I was cycled up between Indian Springs, 6 weeks up and 6 weeks back, a number of times. But the last time I was there, before I left for Viet Nam, was a young officer who thought that, you know, because he was an officer, he knew everything. And I tried to explain to him, he didn't know anything about the Tall Whites or anybody out there. And I tried to explain to him, I had 3 stripes at a time, you know, what he was facing. And he was so arrogant. And I mean, you can't, he made my drill sergeant blush the way he treated me, but you know, you have to show respect to your officers in the military. And so then I didn't tell him. And then when I left, he was out there by himself. He went one of the second or third afternoons he was out there, when he went out to the theonics and to the balloon, the teacher came up when near him, introduced herself, and of course, being an officer, he was in charge of the range, and he thought he was talking to a human because she apparently was wearing her nurse disguise, and he made the horrible blunder of grabbing her by the arm. They're very frail, and if you do that, you could break their bones and kill them for life just by shaking their hands. And the teacher, took out her weapon and forced him to release it. And she hypnotized him and said to him, that's one mistake you'll remember. And then he was hypnotized, and when he came to, there were 3 tall white guards who had no sense of humor, who had him down, who beat the living hell out of him. They had him down on the floor in the weather shack, beating the hell out of him, saying, because they wouldn't kill him because he hadn't killed the teacher, but they damaged him. They gave him the instrument of obedience. They gave him the works. And when he left that place, he was in such terror that the military gave him discharged him. an honorable discharge, section 8, for mental reasons, because he was so ungodly afraid of him, and with good reason. If he'd gone out there again, they would have, turned him into ashes. And after, then there was the Nellis incident of September 1968, which now when you say what happened in 68, all you see is a BS thing put in there by the government. But after I'd been sent discharged from the Air Force, the tall whites wanted me to come back and be the Nellis the officer of the ranges. The tall whites wanted me to, and the military wanted me to, but I wasn't ready to. I was tired, and I wanted to just go home. But there's that incident which used to be in all the books, but now keeps disappearing. But there isn't time for me to go through that one. Okay.
Do you
Jared,
regret not volunteering for that?
Say again?
Do you regret not volunteering for that?
No, I'm happy with my wife and kids. When you go out in the desert alone, you're playing a game of inches for your life and death. I mean, a frickin' game of inches. There was a night that I was out in the Valley of the Grays. I was in the North Side Canyon, and I'd finished taking the weather report for the late afternoon, and it was snowing and freezing rain. And when I was coming back from the North Side Canyon, I had to be on at least a 15%, 10 or 15% downgrade, and I was on glare ice, and I was pulling my equipment case, and it was sliding on the ice, and I was expecting it to catch on the rocks and stuff through the ice, and I was right next to an arroyo with sheer sides that went down 20 feet into sheer depth, into a stream and stuff, and I fell down, and I was on my sliding on, and I was holding onto my case, and I was sliding slowly towards that. Every time I moved slowly towards that arroyo, and it looked like I was going to go over the end, and I was praying and begging God to save my life. And my case wouldn't catch on a rock or anywhere. I had no way to stop it. And I got within the width of my hand of that frickin' over of the edge, when in my guardian angels, I'm certain, came, and my case caught on a rock I could never find or see, but it caught on a rock, and allowed me to pull myself away from the edge and make it away from the edge in a different direction. And when I got off that, past the crosslink fence and stuff, I was so exhausted. I just sat down on a rock, and there were tears in my eyes. I was thanking God so much that He had saved my life, because I was facing certain death. And it just shows what I've said, that when you go alone into the desert, it's a game of inches for your life, whether it looks that way or not. It might just be cactus, you'd be wearing boots and you step on a cactus and it puts cactus thorns in your boots. Now you can't walk even a few inches without dying. You have to be so careful when you're out there.
So,
Yeah.
say, I know we're running out of time here, but if you could, I'm kind of a technology guy myself, so I'd like if you could give me a little more brief descriptions of any technologies you saw, and for example, you're talking about what they had, weapons and such, and the spaceship. What all did you see there? If you could briefly describe things.
When you went on board the Scoutcraft, which had been built by American defense contractors, one of the things they had was a microwave oven. In 1956, 1965, microwave ovens were still quite new. And what they had done is they'd taken the door off the oven. The tall whites had done is they'd taken the door off the oven and put on an extended outer cover. And the extended outer cover, they'd wrapped coils around it, fiber optic coils. And when you turned on the coils, that formed the door to the oven. That formed a force field across the entrance to the microwave oven that forced all of the microwaves in the oven to stay in the oven and not escape into the Scoutcraft itself. And so one of the kinds of force fields that exist are force fields that interact directly with light, including make them reflect. I cover that in my Hall photon theory thing, Mirage Galaxies, where you can see, and it's done on a Rumble video. If you go into that, you'll get more answers to your questions. And into Hall photon theory, you'll get more answers to your questions because there's more force fields and more kinds of photons, more kinds of particles. And gravity, it's simple to show that gravity must travel trillions of times faster than the speed of light. Before I published my Hall photon theory in 1997, you used to always hear that silly argument that how would the Earth move if the sun suddenly wasn't there? And they would say, well, the sun would continue moving as though the Earth would continue moving as though the sun wasn't there for 8.5 minutes. Of course, the reason that's so ridiculous is because it takes light 8.5 minutes to move from the sun to the Earth. As we sit here, the sun is moving as though the sun isn't there, or the Earth. If the Earth were moving, if gravity only moved with the speed of light, as we sit here, the Earth would be moving as though the sun wasn't there. And what would happen is the planets would crash into each other sooner or later. A couple of weeks, you wouldn't have a stable solar system for 4 billion years or 4.5 billion years. The sun must, as we're sitting here, the Earth must know instantaneously where the sun is, because the sun is moving too, and all the other planets are moving too. And if the Earth were allowed to, or any of the planets were allowed to move without knowing where the sun was, they'd run into each other. Gee, Jupiter would move for 20 minutes. If the Earth and the sun were on the Earth and the Jupiter on the same side of the sun, it'd move for like 20 minutes, 12 or 20 minutes without knowing where the Earth was. And sooner or later, over 2 billion years, it'd bump into each other. When you look at a distant galaxy that still has the same symmetry, the gravity on one side must be the same. It must also be moving trillions of times faster to maintain the symmetry, because the galaxy is moving. But if you look at my video, Mirage Galaxies, you'll see it on rumble.com.
Thank you. I believe Christopher has a question, and then we're going to go over to Charles and Fargo. Then we got one more here. So Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I want to say thank you for this wonderful speech, and I was wondering where we could get an autographed copy of your book, and also I wanted to know.
Oh, please, Charles, I'm happy to sign copies of them. And all you have to do is contact us through our email, mh@millennialhospitality.com. Since we aren't
Thank
doing
you.
conferences anymore, I do have a closet full of books, both the hardcovers and the soft covers, as well as the Beyond Relativity that we were fortunate enough to publish in 2020.
Yeah, I do have an issue with my right hand, my signing hand, so it might turn out more scribbly than what you're expecting, but
Oh, boo.
I'll do my
Well, that's
best.
okay. My other question is, based on all your experiences, have you felt that you have grown more positive and more knowledgeable because of all of this, or you feel like it has benefited you in a lot of ways?
Yes, it was a tremendous benefit. If you look at my book, Beyond Relativity, you will see one of the ways I benefited. Being Roman Catholic, the surprise, as I say, wasn't that there was intelligent life who loved each other. The parents loved the children, the parents loved each other, the children loved each other. It wasn't that they loved each other and that God is love. The surprise was that Einstein and the physicists were so wrong about what reality is like. And that one of the ways I benefited was knowing that I know certain that Hall photon theory is correct. Gravity must be traveling trillions of times faster. There must be more force fields that are considered weak fields that also travel trillions of times faster. And there must be more to heaven and religion and so on than what we're told, because the universe is so big, and having seen 3 different extraterrestrials who love each, where the parents love the children, that must be a common thing, love your neighbor throughout the universe. With each of the 3 extraterrestrials, if I didn't hurt them, they wouldn't hurt me. Yeah, if I just treated them the way I wanted to be treated, then I didn't have anything to worry about.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I never became angry with them. Never, never, never. They're too well armed to put up with that.
Jared,
Thank you so much.
we have one more, if that's okay, over in
Sure.
Fargo.
Sure.
Okay, so his question is about the Norwegians and the 24 teeth with the blood type of AB negative, RH negative. A rare blood type. Are you familiar with, or the Norwegians tend to have more of that blood type, I guess?
I don't know anything about blood types. I don't know anything about their blood type. I do know that they can intermarry, and blood type was never, they never referred to blood types being a problem. But I don't know enough about blood types to make a statement.
Okay.
Yeah, Charles, I just had a really quick question, possibly you could answer.
He was asking if any of the 3 races ever discussed any sort of religion with him or anything.
They never discussed religion with me, but when I was, as I describe in my books, when I was up in the Scoutcraft hangar with all the tall whites and sitting, and the teacher was there and the American generals were there, the teacher was explaining to them what kind of person I was. And she said, I believed in God, and that when I prayed that God would protect me from them. And everybody knew what she meant, okay? She didn't have to explain any religious concepts to them. And so I feel, and so because of their insistence of love your neighbor and do good unto others, you know, be a good neighbor, that I feel that they all had religion. I feel quite certain that each one of them were very religious. I just don't know anything about their particular religion. I note that the Sami in Norway have so-called religious festivals that sound to me like greeting newcomers, where they'll be, every now and then they'll have a festival where they'll have a whole big group of Sami put on a big party with food, and then they'll wait for somebody to come up, and they'll be on one side of a big rock, and on the other side will be open country, and then they'll wait for somebody to come and stand on the other side of the rock and begin talking to them in their language. And so that's termed a religious festival. So, you know, maybe you might want to check my books and the information you can on the Sami. The second Sami cultural center is in Duluth, Minnesota.
In the back of you.
Yeah, there's a big bibliography in the back of my books, and the Sami have 2 cultural centers, one in Ari, Finland, and one in Duluth, Minnesota. And you might want to check their cultural center. The university in Milwaukee, the museum in Milwaukee, also has a nice Sami exhibit, and that may give you more information regarding their religions. There's 13 groups of the Sami, and there's too much for me to talk right now, but you might check that.
Okay, well, thank you from Fargo over here. We really appreciate hearing from you, Mr. Hall.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I'm not at my best. I'm not feeling my best, but when I was young,
Well,
when I was young, I could talk and not cough and everything.
Well,
You'll be talking.
if you're up to it,
Dead.
no, I'm sorry, go ahead, Marie.
I just said he'll be talking 3 days after he's dead.
Well, if you're up to it, we got one more question for it, then I'll give you the last word. And the question being is, do you know if any of those races that you have dealt with have the ability to time travel?
I don't believe in time travel. There's more force fields and you can't travel in time. It wouldn't make sense. If you traveled to go either forward or backward, I'll give you a perfectly good example. The Earth and the solar system is moving in space around the galaxy center, and the galaxy is moving in space. If you went back just one day from today, you wouldn't be here where we are right now, because you'd be like thousands of miles away in space. So if you said, I'm going to time travel, what you'd be ending up in, if you were, so let's say you went back in time, you'd end up out in space where the Earth is never in the same place twice, if you look at it from the point of view of the universe. And in the future, you see, if you said, I'm going to go forward in the future, you'd have the same problem. It's not there yet. So I don't believe time travel is ever possible. Now, I didn't say that's for us. God is in charge of time. I'm absolutely certain that our guardian angels, my two guardian angels, have total control of time, can go forward or back or look forward in the future or so on. So the question, I'm certain the angels have no problem, and God has no problem traveling in time and controlling time and seeing what's coming and what happened and so on. But I don't think humans can, okay? Yeah, that's next question.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Charles. Anything else you want to add, then we'll call it good.
I'm fine. Marie, how about you?
It's it would be a delight to get rid of some of the books in my closet.
I want to thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Charles. You're getting better. Marie, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge with everything. Just amazing. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask? Nothing.
I firmly believe that in the part of the country where you are, that there are Norwegians with 24 teeth who may not even realize, who've been here so long, they just think of themselves as human, who are walking the same, that you're running into every day, because there's so much like us. If I can work around one and not know the difference, the only way you can tell is by the teeth.
I wasn't here. Did you tell them about the fellow from Canada who wrote and said?
I didn't, you tell me.
Well, he said he had 24 teeth, and he was originally from Germany, and his mother, he knew his mother, of course, but he never knew his father. So he wrote to us because of the remarks Charles had made about people with 24 teeth.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. You really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you and goodbye.
Dorothy's Isle of Pine root beer. Well, at least it's not ranch. Oh, that is good. Ely root beer lady. Nice. Why are you still here? Meeting's done and over with. You can go home now. It's okay. Just go home. Range 4 Harry? Oh, Charles, you ain't in Wisconsin anymore.